In three, two, one, go.
Welcome to Task Force Griffin on KJR Radio, kjrradio.com. Your connection is secure, and this transmission is now online. Your most humble and blessed host, Commander Cobra, once again talking, and to you, some lucky folks, video streaming to you with thanks and Bill Skywatcher. And we're talking to the greatest audience on the planet. As I said, Bill's on the wing. Please look at the man behind the curtain who makes all the magic work. He is producing and engineering, and he has looped in another service tonight. We are set for another outstanding broadcast. I'm very pleased to tell you that this was another one of those great things that got put together by the guest and the producer, and your host had nothing to really do with it except show up and try to be ready. We're going to dedicate tonight's show. It's going to be to two people. It's to the family of Alfie, the young baby that passed away in Britain. I'm not concerned about the politics. I just would like to extend condolences. That's got to be some of the toughest and emotional driving things that could possibly happen. It was in the news, and it's sad. And all of Task Force Griffin and the family that we are sends condolences. And equally sad, since my guest is from Maine tonight, like myself, we had a tragic law enforcement event this week. It's touched all of us. We have not lost an officer of the law in the line of duty in 30 years. Somerset County Corporal Eugene Cole was killed in the process of apprehending and responding to a call this past week to his family and to his community and his county, the citizens of his county. He was, by all reports, dearly loved, dearly respected, and an important part of his community. So to do both of those families and the greater connection of folks, our deepest sympathy is extended. With that said, tonight, the other Willis brother, Martin Willis, is with us tonight. I say that, Martin, because Dan Willis has been on with me a couple of times. And when I told Bill that, no, Martin's coming on, he goes, Martin, I don't know who Martin is. And then he realized what I was talking about. And he goes, the other Willis is going to be on. And then we got the right weekend set up. Martin, you are a fellow Mainer, and you are also one of the most prolific folks that works on video and podcasting and having the YouTube channel. I've been greatly impressed with the stuff that you've done, and you have a lot of facets that we hopefully will talk about tonight.
Well, thank you.
Welcome to Task Force Griffin and the great audience. I will warn the audience, as you can tell if you're watching the video, I'm a little bit more encumbered tonight so that I could have a visual appearance. I worked very hard to set up the staging behind me, and if I'll just move my shoulder here, you'll see the alien holding the skull and the Cobra skeleton. So that's all been done now. All the props have been seen. Martin, how did you get started in the work that you do?
Well, as far as podcasting goes, I started a podcast back in 2009. I had a connection with a guy that he was on the Man Show years ago, Adam Carolla. I just had talked to him a couple of times, and his radio station basically went down where he was broadcasting in the morning, and I was out in California, and he started doing podcasting, and I said, well, if he can do it, I'll try it. So I tried doing some antique work, and actually it was pretty successful. That's still ongoing now. And so that's how I started podcasting. Now, in 2006, I was actually working in the antiques field that I'm in, antiques and fine art. I was actually at Merv Griffin's, I was working on his estate, and I was staying in Carmel Valley. He had a house in Carmel Valley. I was staying there, and I had a sighting. I've always had kind of an interest in, I've had a vast interest in like space and science and all that, but and we had a flap in Maine years ago when I was growing up, and I remember like looking for UFOs when I was a kid, but then it never really crossed my mind much. I was actually sitting in a hot tub. I was not drinking, and all of a sudden,
just to make sure we clarify the evidence chain of evidence here. You are
Yeah.
in a hot tub in California,
that's right, in
and you were not
Carmel
drinking.
Valley. I was not drinking.
and you were not drinking.
Yes, I know that sounds.
I think that's against the local ordinance there, but please continue for those that are listening.
Well, something caught my eye. It was twilight. It was like 8:30 or something like that. Something caught my eye overhead. So I just looked up and I watched, and I just, if I had a camera next to me, I would have never thought to use it. I got to tell you that, because I was just struck by the moment. And the thing that fascinated me the most when I saw this, it was like a disc, perfectly shaped disc, like the size of a quarter held at arm's length. I guess that's the best way to put it. And I was thinking it was maybe a couple thousand feet high, but it was all guessing. It had a bluish glow over the entire object, and it moved in a straight line over me. And I just remember sitting there and being baffled because there was no sound. I mean, that's the first thing I thought of. Like, I'm seeing this thing move, and there's absolutely no sound. Then it stopped, and then it veered off toward Carmel, Monterey. And so I jumped out of the hot tub, and I ran inside, and I got on the phone. I didn't know who to call. I never thought of anything online at the time. So I got in touch with I think it was the Monterey. I may be getting Carmel and Monterey confused. I think it was the Monterey Police Department. It was a female dispatcher, and she was sarcastic. And then I said, no, I'd like to report. How do I report this? I didn't know how to report it. Mm-hmm. So she put me on hold, and I waited for about 15 minutes, and I got discouraged, and I hung up. And that was kind of like the end of it. So I went it wasn't a spectacular sighting, but it was a sighting. And it certainly rocked my boat on what I thought about the whole situation. I went inside. I'm sitting inside, and I'm thinking, who am I going to tell this to? And I couldn't think of, it really never crossed my mind to go online. So at work the following week, I had kind of a close person I was working with. I was basically mentoring her. And I said, please don't tell anyone, but I have to tell you what happened this weekend. And I told her, and it wasn't maybe a week later that everyone there was teasing me, so it got around pretty fast. So, I just never talked about it. Years went by, and I moved from California back to Maine, where I'm originally from. And I was doing some podcasts with comedians that I knew in California and met them, and I was running that for a while. And I was on someone else's show, and they said, what's the weirdest thing that ever happened to you? So I told of the UFO experience, basically. And the guy was really funny. He said, well, how was the probing going? And, did you see, and all that stuff. He was really teasing me. And then
I think you could have said that, though, just on any trip to California, but that's my own personal bias slipping out there.
Yeah. So anyway, he called me a few weeks later, and he said, you know what? He said, this show, he did like this keyword search and what people were landing on. He said it was UFOs. He said we were talking about UFOs and had a lot of traffic on this particular podcast. And so I thought about it, and I said, wow, I think doing a show on UFOs would be pretty interesting. I don't know anything about them. So I looked on YouTube. I started doing some reading. Then first person I contacted was Stan Friedman. I didn't hear from him. Then I contacted, I can't remember how many other people. And finally, Steve Bassett, I contacted him, and he said, sure. And I said, well, I've never had a show on UFOs before, and it's really bad. My first show was really bad, I have to tell you. And then Bill Burns.
Yeah, when you go back to the archives on this one, we can compare notes.
But so it kind of just snowballed from there. And I have a listener, Scott, who is, I don't know how he found my show, but like the second show, brand new website. I put it on iTunes. I think that's probably how we found it. So it's been going on. It's coming up. I think this week is the 300th show that we have coming up on Wednesday.
It's a tremendous show that you put together.
Well, thank you. I have a lot of fun, and I think that's important to just have fun and enjoy it and listen to what people's ideas are. No one really has an answer. Some people have been on my show think they do have an answer, but I beg to differ. And as a matter of fact, the saying is, if someone tells you they know what a UFO is, run the other way, you know, and I think that's not a bad idea.
So we should probably mention how you and I got together. We have a mutual friend, Melanie,
Right. Yeah.
that as your show and my show playing in her shop. And she's a fellow Mainer as well. And she started to
right.
put you and I on an email chain, trying to convince you to come on to the show. Then you were on with Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, the 1 week of that month that I was not on the show. So when I called you and we were starting, yeah, but I've already been on your show. And you
I think
said,
I was on previously when you were on there.
right. And we
thought
talked
so.
a very, very
Yeah.
short time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
a shout out to Melanie for setting this up and getting us all together and connecting us up.
Yeah, just before we move on, I'm looking at what you're wearing. Is that hard? Are you having a hard? I mean, that looks heavy. Is it heavy?
I have very well developed neck muscles. For most of my flying career, I wore something like this.
Really? Yeah.
So this is the actual helmet that I wore for the last part of my military flying career, and then I actually used this same helmet when I was in Iraq. And if you look at this little piece that I have my hand on right here, this is where the NVGs would hook on to, and then they can flip up and down depending on how you need to fly it. So that would be an extra couple pounds of gear here and some wires, and then on the back side is a battery pack and some other kit that goes with it. And then you strap it all on. Yeah, so when my wife, sometimes my wife comes in on the show, and I wonder tonight if she did, you know, she be prepared. You're going to be on 1 million screens across the globe when people are watching, because Martin's got a pretty big following. And she goes, "Oh, I won't be coming in tonight." I said, "What you should do is put the alien mask on and come in and bring me a cup of tea." Maybe the next time we'll do that. Now, one of our other audience members that I do want to say hi to is Susan. She actually visited this week. She came out to what we call Wolf's Moon Farm, where my wife and I live with the critters, the animals, and we had a great visit. It was wonderful to finally have her. She's got some family. She travels between North Carolina and here, and she's very good friends with Mary Joyce, who I think you have. Saucers Over the Cachers is her site. And she's a frequent guest on Task Force Griffin. It's a wonderful group of ladies there that we have worked with. Right. So you have this first experience. It kind of lights the fire. I think you're very fortunate, because I've always wanted to. I'm jealous because I would have liked to have had the experience. I have not. I have not had the everything that I have seen. I've been able to explain, and it was usually something connected with the project. And I don't even think it's anything that I could say was reversed engineered or came from any other source, but something like the Skunk Works or some other part of the military or aerospace world that had put it together. But I'm always ready. I've been in some of the loneliest parts of the globe by myself, so I was a prime candidate. So I guess because if you want to, it's not going to happen. Right. What have you seen since then?
I haven't seen anything really. That, you know, the one thing I do have to say I saw in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and I didn't really want to talk about it because I was thinking, you know, what are the odds that I'm actually going to have 2 sightings? I thought I was seeing the International Space Station because it was large, and it was kind of moving in a straight line. And then I went to film it, and I could have sworn it jagged over, but, you know, I'm saying it was probably something like that, most likely. And I've seen many satellites, and it was much bigger. It was whatever it was, but I think that's about it. But I do have a very interesting story to tell you. What happened during one of my shows was at one time I was living in a condo on a golf course in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, and during my show, my neighbor tried to knock on my door, and I talked to her a few days later, and she said, "I tried to knock on your door and the other night," and I said, "When?" And she said, "Wednesday night," or whenever I was doing my show at the time. And I said, "Oh, yeah, I was busy." So she said, "This weird thing came over the golf course." She said it looked like a triangle with lights, and it just like sweeped right over the golf course. I said, "You got to be kidding me." So while I was having my show, this thing was right outside my door. I didn't see it. So I asked her, I said, would you please come on my show and talk about that? And she said, no. And I don't believe in UFOs. I told her I did a show, and then, ever since then, she kind of avoided me. But she wouldn't come on even anonymously and talk about it. She just didn't want anything to do with the subject. And I think that is a problem that a lot of people encounter when they want to talk about what they've seen.
But she was willing to share it with you, but not
Right.
talk
Not
any
publicly.
further than that. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the public thing I understand. I think a lot of folks are probably still think there's a certain stigma attached to it, and we're going to delve into that in the next blocks as we work through on the show. It's a special night for us because of the YouTube side of it. We really don't have a break.
That's right.
I'm going to have to duck away and drop to the floor and do some kind of a crawl if I have to use take a bathroom break in there. But I'm ready because I'm used to sitting in the seat for a couple hours and going, so I'm all set. But you must have had some compelling. Some of the pods that I've listened to that you've put out, you have had some interesting interactions with people that are relating their experience to you, and you seem to react to it in a very human, emotional way. What are the memorable ones that you've dealt with? Well,
I think I would have to say one of the most memorable shows that I did was with Selma Siddiq. She was one of these 62 children that were at the Ariel school and that had the Ariel school encounter. That show in particular just ran chills up my spine when I was talking to her. Because first of all, it's an amazing case. It happened in, I want to say, 1994 or 1995. So she's in her 20s now. And all these students, it was such a bizarre situation because all these students 62 children saw this craft land and these beings come out, and some people seem to see something a little different. It was kind of unusual. And for instance, when the being was walking, it looked like it was floating. Some people said that, and her in particular said no. But she was only within 4 feet of this being, whatever it was. And she described it, and she said its face was almost like porcelain, like no expression. And, that particular encounter, a lot of these kids had, telepathic thoughts that, and a lot of it had to do with, maintaining the planet and, taking care of the planet. She in particular didn't, but her story was just absolutely incredible. Really, I would say that was my favorite show of all time. Now, I've talked to a lot of different people that either have had encounters, and you talk about yourself never having an encounter, and there are people like Stan Friedman. He's never had a single encounter. Steve Bassett, who I mentioned, was the first person on my show, has never had an encounter. But they know there's something going on, and they're dedicating themselves to looking into it, which is actually pretty refreshing if you really think about it. Someone that's never had an encounter invest all their time and thoughts in it, and are doing a pretty good, straightforward look into it.
Have you had anybody that you just out and out thought was full of it, for lack of a better term?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. Yes, I've had a few people on. I had one sort of recently, and so I don't want to name names.
Sure.
But I've had people that are saying I had one person that was saying that he's been on Venus. So I don't really buy that. But I let them say what they will, and it's the audience that will certainly comment. You do get a lot of that.
Well, we're starting to work up towards our first break, and one of my most dedicated listeners who gives me a really a pretty decent hard time he's from New Hampshire. That ought to explain everything for you and I being from Maine.
Uh-huh.
I think he wants me to have papers when I cross the border into New Hampshire. He kept asking about flows, and he says it's a Maine staple and that we should know what that is. Does that mean anything
Oh yes,
to you?
it does.
Perfect. Thank you for
Flo's hot
saving the
dogs.
show once again.
Yeah, Flo's Hot Dogs on Route 1 in York, Maine. It's been there for, I don't know how many decades, maybe 7 decades or something like that. And it's just basically hot dogs. It's always packed, and it's because they have this special type of relish that is really, really good. You could throw the hot dog away and just eat the relish, but I mean, it's really good. So
All right, well,
you're lucky I
I
know
actually
about
have
that.
been by Flo's, Lib. I've never had one of the hot dogs nor the relish. I do see you're right again, and we've got that all taken out before all taken care of going into the on this first section of the show. That's excellent. When we talked about guests, have you had to work hard to get people to want to come on your show?
You know, that's what I found real amazing. You know, it was hard when I was doing a show with comedians. I was trying to get some good names on there. The show's not even up anymore. I mean, the podcast site is gone. But I did have, Jen Kirkman and Paul Gilmartin and a number of people on the show. That was really tough. In the UFO field, I found right from the get-go that it was fairly easy. People want to talk about it. So I would say that getting guests on the UFO show, and now that it's established, is pretty easy. And I have, I'm booked out till the end of May. Sometimes I've actually had, people bail at the last minute and, had to scramble. So that does happen occasionally, but it's actually pretty good, and actually really great people I've had. Fun, interesting, and a whole variety.
All right. Well, let's plug your show and the time that that comes up now as we go to the first break, and we'll pick it up in about 3-4 minutes.
All right. So it's Podcast UFO, and it's every Wednesday, and it's at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Podcast UFO it is. I enjoy it. I actually do not get a chance very often to catch it live. And I enjoy putting it on, much like Melanie, our mutual friend that brought us together, I guess our parole officer. That's what she's going to be serving as tonight. It's great to have in the background because you do a show that you don't have to see it, and of course then you'll say something and you want to go right to the screen and go, okay, I got to see the facial expressions when that was said. And I won't embarrass anybody with some of the stuff that has happened, but there have been moments where I've said, I've got to figure out, I got to see what these people's faces look like when they said this. I've got to get my connection here to make sure I got it well. Okay, folks, you're listening to Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com. My special guest tonight, Martin Willis, Podcast UFO. A man of many talents, and we're going to explore those as we come back on the other side. And we're very fortunate to have Martin, as well as through his offices being able to put this on a YouTube channel as well. Please return. We'll be right back.
Clear.
Thank you.
All right, so we're clear, but we're not clear on YouTube.
No, that's right. We're clear, but we're not clear on YouTube.
Yeah, so no swearing.
Martin, you know what you do? You should flip the script on him, and you should ask him the same kind of questions he was asking you.
Well, if he does that now, Bill, then when he calls me when one of his guests drops out, then I will not play the game. See, now he knows that I'm in the O column to him. That's I'm in his book after coming on tonight, and that's fine. And if he catches me and I can get home on a Wednesday night, I'll do it.
I was looking through the chat room, and someone says, "You look great, Commander." And so anyone, actually, what do we have, a couple minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, someone wants to know why you're wearing the helmet. So go ahead and answer that if you want.
Well, the helmet is to protect my identity. What started out as part of to give certain people that I was contracting for some space to have a guy who talks about the things that I talk about and some of the things that I was involved in and on the show, outside of the show on my other work. Believe it or not, unlike Martin, I have to have a couple other full-time jobs to keep things rolling. I'm not Martin's the one that's making all the large big dollars in Maine in podcasts. You can just look at his face on
sure.
the camera right now. It's there. So
Yeah.
that's the reason why. Well, now it's become part of the brand. A few folks, in fact, two that are in the chat room have actually met me without the helmet on, and they've met Mrs. Cobra. And although I sometimes refer to her being an alien, she's not. She's actually just from Idaho. But to folks in New England, that's kind of like being an alien. So that's the background. So the helmet helps protect my identity. Someday there'll probably be a coming out party. I'll have to break with it. The disappointment will be huge for most folks when they finally do see what I look like.
Now, are you saying that you're actually protecting your identity because of some work that you're doing and you're...
Well, that and the people that I do work for. Some of the contractors I do work for, they would hate to see my real name show up and connected to it. And now that most of that work has really slipped to very little. But some of the projects I worked on over the last 14 or so years since I retired, I was still very deep. Now, most folks knew I would tell them about the show, and many of them listened to it. And I would try to throw some kind of small plug in during the broadcast that would identify them. And the out note, sometimes I would talk about the test team I was with. This mic is a gift from Mac Maloney, who got me started in this.
Oh, yeah.
You know Mac very well.
Yeah.
And Mac got me this Yeti mic, and this mic has been all over the United States. It's been in my helmet bag. It's been in hotel rooms.
Gentlemen,
Yes, Bill?
I don't mean to interrupt, but we're coming back from the break in about 5 seconds.
Copy.
In 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome back to Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com, talking to the greatest audience on the planet. My guest tonight, Mr. Martin Willis from Maine, a fellow maniac. Off air, for those of you that are not delving into the YouTube side of this, Martin asked me, he was reading because he's checking the chat room. He's clandestinely watching what's going on in there so that he can control the numbers, I think, to make sure things are working. And why am I wearing the helmet? I didn't want to say that I was wearing the helmet because it's not that good looking of a person, and the helmet helps keep the audience intrigued. That's part of it. The other part was explained to Martin was the kind of the work that I did, not revealing my identity was useful to help keep separation with some of the projects I was working on. I've never ever released anything because I'm bound on my security clearance that I wasn't supposed to release. But things that I could talk about or things that I did encounter, I'm pretty frank, as you know, from the past that we've talked. But now it's kind of a brand thing. I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, so I guess this is my version of John Galt, who is Commander Cobra. So there you go.
Now, isn't Commander Cobra like a fictional character, right?
Yeah, Cobra is a fictional character out of the G.I. Joe series. He was but Commander Cobra's unique brand, and it reflects my call sign from my military flying and the rank that I retired at. So I retired as a commander. It started out on Mac's show as Commander X, and apparently there's a guy that has Commander X trademarked, and he got in touch with us to let us know that he did not appreciate Commander X being used anymore. Because with Mac, everything is Agent X, Commander X, Friend X, Reporter X, and I think that's because it was just easier for us to get through it. And everyone kind of liked it. The Commander Cobra thing is how we were able to fix it.
I see. We were talking, a little bit. You were talking a little bit about, why you kind of want to hide your identity. And, there was kind of a rumor now. I don't really know if it's true or not, but I think I may have lost a job because I do this show. And the job I had at the time was probably one of the best part-time jobs a person could have. I mean, it was just amazing. So in the antiques and fine arts, it was actually in the auction business for a big auction company. And it was just a wonderful job. And all of a sudden, it was like they said, well, there's not enough business in this area. And, we're going to have to let you go. And I've never been let go, ever. And then one of the people that worked at this company said, maybe you ought to be a little bit careful about your UFO show and mixing it, being in the antique business. So I kind of took that as a hint. That's possibly why my job was terminated. Now I don't know if I can't prove it, but that's a possibility, which is kind of a shame, I think. And I don't think that's going to happen as much now, since there's a little more publicity about the UFO, search, that our government actually was taking it serious. It has a few times, but I mean more recently, this New York Times article that came out December 16th of last year, I think kind of changed a little bit on the way people look at the topic. What's your thoughts on that? I know you're interviewing me, right? But
yeah, but nice segue into it. You and I have spoken a little bit off air about this. The initial, not the least bit surprised that we had a Pentagon program. The rollout in December, my refined remarks on it, there was some interesting stuff there. I think it was done more as a measure to see how people were reacting. I think it had a lot to do with our president and the kind of atmosphere that is going on in the internet media. Meaning that was a reason to pump a lot of information into it. We may be at the precipice of finally coming clean and opening up all the files. But before December, a lot of folks don't refer to this one very much. A lot of the JFK assassination files were released, with the exception of some stuff that was publicly held by the CIA, which I found interesting. That why would you even bring that up? Why would you throw that into the mix? Why would you put those letters, that agency, that name together and work that in? So I think it was as much as releasing and to see, they wanted to track how we're going to react. Everything is done by polls. Everything is done by where they think public opinion is rolling. I think that's the reason why a lot of our policy and things are very screwed up. And I think this is just one of those issues. With that said, the people that were involved, Mr. Bigelow, former Senator Reid, very interesting cast of characters that were in on that. There's, I think, some very true bona fide people and events that are wrapped in that. And I think the first things that they released were manufactured, very heavily edited, not manufactured evidence, but manufactured and handled, packaged the way it came out. Go ahead.
Are you saying that because of the short span of the videos themselves?
The quality of the videos, the way that the heat is coming off of them. This is one of the things that you spoke to me at length about, because when the second one came out, I had told you that I was actually at a place where I had seen that video. I'm sure of it, as part of other videos are on there. It's actually, the second one is an excellent demonstration of someone who really knows how to operate a system well, manually running over to what they visually see moving, driving the system over to it, and then putting an auto lock onto it. That's not hard to do with radar, hard in a relative sense. Optically driving a system, that can be very difficult. And it was a very good piece of work. And as we talked, I'm convinced it's either some kind of ammunition, or, as you were talking off air before we came on, most likely it's some kind of a UAS, unmanned aerial system.
Right. What about, have you looked at all of there's actually been 3 now that were released. One of them was kind of, I think, released actually prior to that, called the Nimitz. Have you looked at all of those?
Yes. The Nimitz one, it was 2 sets of events that occurred around the major reveal. And working backwards as we talked, I'm not surprised that the Pentagon had a name program, and I'm not surprised that it's ended, and they discussed that that program ended. And it may have ended on a Friday, and I guarantee you on Monday, There was a new office and a new set of folks that were working it, or split over to two other teams. There's no doubt in my mind that that work continues.
Yes.
In some way, ultimately, my belief system has me at the point that there are a group of people that aren't part of the elected body of the government. I don't think the term deep state properly fits, but it does kind of metaphorically, the folks that are in areas that work into it that hold any number of secrets. Some are critical, to our national security, that those secrets are mixed in there with it, that are constantly looking at these kinds of events, looking at these kinds of experiences in these reports. I think there's enough evidence there that tells me that there is a very strong case to be made for extraterrestrial visits. I think there's a very strong case to be made for reverse engineering of extraterrestrial technology. And I think a lot of the things that we see, that we claim, or people claim, is man-made military objects that are flying.
There's a number of people that have speculated that the triangles that people are seeing, even though they are mostly silent, some people report them with a humming, but there's a lot of people speculating that those are actually black ops, or not exactly, or secret military craft.
Yeah, well, I think that when we get black ops,
I said that by accident. Yeah, I said that by accident.
I would say it's a black program, or
that's what I meant to say.
Program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let's take the case of the SR-71. The aircraft was flying well over 10 years before anybody really knew that it was out flying. They paraded other aircraft. In fact, they used the UFO phenomenon as a way to cover up it and a number of other aircraft that were out flying.
That's right.
The Air Force was engaging, the government was engaging and feeding disinformation into that system. Now, that's an effective tool. Disinformation is one of the things I was taught as part of my career in the military and some of the work. How did you deceive, not so much the public, it was, in my case, it was the enemy, but how do you deceive the enemy's civilian populace? Like if we're going to do a helicopter insertion, we're going to put a team in, you would make multiple approaches that look like landings. And on one of those, that's when they actually got off, and you continued, so that it did not give an indication, a helicopter went into a field and everybody, that's where they focus their interest, and they go look for the team that you've inserted or the people that you're trying to extract out. So that I think that sets a pretty good case, a pretty good precedent on how we're going to go forward. We definitely become creatures of habit.
The one argument that I've had about when people say that, all the triangles that people are seeing are, secret military craft. The argument I have in that is, all the way back to, I'm trying to think, it was like 1960 or something like that in Lubbock, Texas. The first triangle that was pictured and witnessed by tons of people.
And that was actually went all the way up into Kansas, Wichita. They were seen. There was a number of cell phone pictures. It's an interesting thing that you bring up on a lot of fronts there, Martin.
No, I mean, this was an earlier. This was prior to cell phone. This was, you were talking about the Phoenix Lights, perhaps? I was talking about in Lubbock. These are early triangles. Also, a friend of mine, Lee Spiegel, that used to work at the Huffington Post, he's now working with James Fox on a UFO video. He actually had an encounter in North Carolina. I want to say it was late 1970s, with a triangle that came over silently and shot down a beam of light right at their feet, along with him with a whole bunch of police officers. So I don't think that we're going to have secret military craft going that far back that we still wouldn't know anything about. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that we will, or we did. I will cite for folks that are new to the show, if you have a chance, download Mr. Lear's show. Mr. Lear talks about some of the things that he was made known or had some knowledge of. The aircraft that you were just referred to, the very silent one, the one that shot the beam, that one there, I'm almost sure was a combination of a dirigible type design that it had lighter than air properties and it had other things made it to it. Partially because they were looking for the ability to have surveillance and the ability to take extended surveillance activity over a target area. Not a lot of heat being produced, so it wouldn't show up. Very quiet. Had some characteristics of being able to fly and have some control. That's what dirigibles give. And that triangle shape, I think, not so much coincidence, but I believe that's what that vehicle had been talked about and had been seen in Europe quite a bit. And I believe it was for a specific purpose. And a lot of the vehicles that we have work that way. They do show up in a very specific mission set that they want to get coverage or some capability. Same thing happened with the with our Predators and the unmanned aerial vehicles. You know, they've exploded in their capability. So I think that you're talking about a family of different types of aircraft that have that shape. If you look at fighter aircraft or transport aircraft, they all look the same. Some had propellers, some have jet engines. Their capabilities are similar, but their characteristics are what's different. There was a helicopter project that's been on, very much the forerunner to some of the things that went on the Bin Laden raid, where the helicopters were nearly silent. I saw these aircraft used in exercises. The problem is that to make them silent made them not such good helicopters. They were great for moving around. They're very quiet, but you had to compromise a lot of other capabilities that didn't make them useful. Now, you have had some experiences with the triangle, and you know that that's one of my if there's anything that gets my attention, if there's a shiny bell that when it rings gets my attention, it's definitely the black triangle discussion.
Well, you know, a couple things to argue there about what you're saying is a number of people have said that they've seen these things shoot off at a high rate of speed, and again with no sound at all. That is repeated quite often. Another thing, a lot of people are saying these things are enormous, you know, sometimes perhaps even more than a mile wide. There would be absolutely no reason why the government would make something like that.
Agreed.
I mean, it wouldn't make any sense. So I don't know. You know, I would say that you're probably right on some of them. And I've always thought that too, that some of these triangles could actually be military, absolutely, without a doubt. And when I say could, I don't know if they actually have that technology, but I've never really heard the dirigible thought. I guess it would make sense, something that would go out at night and surveil, but now they have, why would they do that when they have drones? The drones can do all that.
Well, the time period you were talking about, I would be very doubtful if that aircraft is still flying. But a specific time and period during the Cold War and the technology at the time, that type of aircraft, that type of persistent capability. Remember, we didn't even have the ability to really downlink the imagery very well until well into the 80s. We're still very dependent on, well, in the 70s all the way into the early 80s, we were actually dropping film canisters out of our satellites that had to be caught in the air. Then the ability to send those pictures down by radio technology, and now that's been replaced by still using a radio wave, but you're packing more information. I mean, just the fact that we have the kind of Wi-Fi capabilities that we have now, these are the fruits of the labor to be able to have secure links and to send an information out. So, yeah, the airship version of this fit, and Spike, it was the last name of the author. He was pretty famous through the 70s and 80s. He did a lot of research, Aviation Week, and it was one of the ones, aircraft that he didn't have definitive proof, but he had a pretty good postulation of what was happening there, and it was that mix in there. But you
Interesting.
said when we were off air before we came on that you did have an experience up in Maine, and I'm convinced that between where you and I live, is a major routing structure that flies back and forth and uses the tanker fleet that's in this area.
Yes, I personally didn't see that. I didn't see that object that I told you about, but my girlfriend basically did see it. She said it was tiny because it was up so high, but she
Mhm.
said it had. She said it. I think she said it had 5 lights, and one in the center, and it was shaped like a boomerang or triangle type of thing, and that was. Like I said, that was way overhead, and it may have just been a plane in the way the lighting was on the plane. I'm not sure. I didn't
It's
see it.
interesting the way she describes that, and I'd love her to see a picture. I'll have to send you the sketch when I dig it up. I have a offline print graphic artist that does a lot of the T-shirts and other stuff for the show, plus other work related stuff. And he drew me because he's very talented because he can sketch and he can take the scratchings you come in with, and he'll build the artwork for your everything from the decals to the car wraps to the T-shirts. And he drew a very classical picture, and his theory, he's a longtime resident of Maine as well, is that this is technology that why would be flying here, because we have a major engine manufacturer that's in the area, and we have a fairly isolated part of the country. And I think a lot of times, I know that we would do operations in Europe when I was stationed there, just to partially gauge how the public would react, to how the civilian populace reacted to our presence being there, as a way to how effective we were to moving or cover. And a lot of times, if somebody else was doing something of very sensitive nature, other aircraft would be out there drawing your attention. So while everybody's looking up at the sky and seeing large formations of aircraft moving, a very small set of helicopters is moving in to go do a mission, in a sensitive area. In those days, it was East and West Germany. I can leave most of that to your imagination to figure out how that was going on. I affectionately refer to those days as Mad Magazine Spy versus Spy, because that seemed to be the playbook. It was a lot of fun, and luckily it never turned to anything more serious than being serious about our work.
Wow, interesting. So what do you think that...
Well, let's circle back.
All right, go ahead.
We talked about Stars to the Academy. Give me your take on that release in December and the videos that have come out since then.
Well, I've had Leslie Kane on my show a number of times, and also I was one of the people that got to interview Ralph Blumenthal, who was one of the co-authors of that particular viral. I guess nothing went viral more than that for in the UFO field. Nothing's gone quite like that. I think there was over 100 news shows on that alone, in particular, all over, every. So I think it was great that got out there. I think that it's helped in a lot of ways. It's helped more people that were on the fence maybe take a serious look, and that's what we need. And I've spoken to both Leslie and Ralph Blumenthal, and Ralph says, hold on, there's more to come. And he will be on my show again, but he says we have to, we're working with the New York Times, and there's going to be more released. Now,
did he give you an explanation why it's coming out so slowly?
I think
in the age that we live in? I mean, I understand
yeah.
if it's going to be for some kind of a profit-generated part of it. I mean, they have to make money. They have to sell papers. They have to sell their news. But what's the explanation, or what's your summation of why it's taking so much time?
I would say it's more my summation, and that is that I think they're just trying to keep it alive, and so it just doesn't fade away. Like, it's such an ephemeral society now, and I don't know if you're watching the news, but there's so many dramatic things on the news all the time, and it's yesterday's news instantly. It fades away. I still think that a lot of people actually witnessed one of those TV shows or news shows about the Pentagon release, and I think it is. When I brought the topic up to I would say people outside of the UFO field. Did you see that? The Pentagon released the fact that they've been looking into, UFOs and whether they're a threat or not. And a lot of people saw that. It really got a lot of people's attention. So I personally think that it was a real good thing. And I think that, like I said, it's going to have more people taking it serious. People that were on the fence about looking into it may start looking into it, and there's going to be less ridicule. And for instance, this Arizona, I don't know if you caught this, Arizona sightings of the FAA actually released the recordings of the pilots talking about seeing this UFO overhead. That wouldn't have happened prior to the New York Times article coming out. The FAA has been real guarded about any UFO material getting out there that they have anything to do with. So I think it's a good thing overall.
All right, I guess I'm gonna beg to differ with you because the age that we live in, I don't understand why you have to drag it out as slow as you have to drag it out. We're living in it. We're living. Mm-hmm. I mean, people do not go to the. I know that the vast majority of people still pick up their news by looking at the 3 primary media networks, but they were a big part of this story. And the print media is not print anymore; it's print with everything that's online. To the Stars Academy has the ability to put a lot of information out in depth with explanation, with podcasts. I can understand if you're trying to build interest and you're trying to do that, but this is not a movie that anybody's going to wait to see if you continue to drag it out, in my opinion. For people that are believers, people that are listening tonight to this show and go to your podcast to see that, we're already in on the belief. We're looking for something to help substantiate it. So I don't understand what the theory is on how slow to go and why it's a 2 or 3 minute clip. And there's no explanation. There's no briefing that goes with their clip. They just talk about.
I know a little bit about that part, and that is Luis Elizondo, that was heading that project for the Pentagon, who recently retired, said that there is footage before and after that, but it's not unclassified. And I think perhaps that may be part of the deal, is maybe we're getting fed this. It's not just like the New York Times and these authors hanging on to what they know, and To the Stars hanging on to what they know. Perhaps it's a trickle down from the being released from the Pentagon. I don't know, or if they'd even want to bother with it.
I'm gonna give you. We're coming up to our next break, so I'm gonna give you a lead into our next part.
Okay.
One of the stories you referred to, we had an unidentified object. Arizona came over through Oregon, went its way back towards Idaho. A very good friend of the show, Tyler Rogaway, thewarzone.com. He broke the story. He did the work. He did Freedom of Information. He's a 2-man shop. He's got a partner. They uncovered more information. They released more. Now, they didn't release any video data that went with it because there really wasn't any video data to go. There wasn't any HUD film from the F-15s that did that. But he's got all the conversations. He got all the transcripts. He turned that around in a matter of a week and continued to break it down, followed up with it, what I consider pretty decent journalism. I understand that this is a sensational pileup that you have and you're going to release that info, but the two of them don't stand side by side. Telling me that you have classified information on the front part of a video, classified information in the other part, and then you have the commander that was flying the aircraft on all the major news network, and then he disappears, doesn't add up to me. There's something that doesn't link up. So I'm going to hold you on that one.
Okay.
This is Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, KGR.com. We're talking to the greatest audience on the planet, and we're very lucky to have one of the greatest podcasters on the planet, Martin Willis. And we'll be back in about 3 minutes. Please stand by.
Clear. Commander, I don't know if you got my message regarding Marc Dantonio. He would like to join the show for the final segment to speak with both of you.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. Awesome.
Now, where'd you send that, Bill? Because I didn't see it come in.
I sent it to you individually.
Okay, that's why I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, I didn't want to confuse the conversation that was going on with you guys. So we got 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Oh, excellent. All right. I'm going to look through the chat room again and see if we have anything here for questions. Let's see. Interesting what you're... I have a moderator on there that deleted something, so there was something going on there. Oh, yeah. They want to know, have you saw or witnessed anything? You already talked about that. Oh, right. I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Were you ever briefed into top secret programs?
You can answer that, Martin, anytime you want.
No, I haven't been. I think he was
obviously now is that someone on your side of your podcast?
Yeah, they're asking if you were ever briefed in.
I understand. All right. Well, so while we're waiting, there was quite a few. I did carry a top secret clearance. It's not active anymore. It's because I'm working with a project that requires it. Much of the very sensitive, especially when you were moving troops, when I was working in places like Kosovo and Iraq, you had to be very careful how you were read into programs and pieces because of other components that were going on around that. What people think, and I'm pretty sure what the question is driving at, a lot of people think because you have a clearance that you can go and look and see things. No, that's not how it works. And there's a very strong part of keeping things in compartments, or a need to know, as it's sometimes referred to in the movies and television, that you have to be part of a project to go do that. I try to explain to a good friend of mine that there are probably people that are young, enlisted, that have more knowledge and have seen more things because of the areas where they were in and how they were handling large amounts of information than many the rest of us that, held higher position or higher rank. It's a matter of where you're at. But yes, had all those classified briefs. Still go every now and then to have my recurrency to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to. And most of my secrets, so the things I've seen, were sensitive information regarding ops or some kind of capability we're going to build, or some way that we were actually able to do what we were doing work-wise.
All right, gentlemen, we're coming back in about 15 seconds.
Okay.
In 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome back to Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, KGRradio.com. My guest tonight, Mr. Martin Willis, a fellow maniac, a connoisseur of antiquities or antiques, depending on what part of Maine you're in.
That's right.
We've been moving around the map here a little bit. The Black Triangle sighting, I got a couple questions I would need to clean up here that I've let slide a little bit. Where your significant other said that she had seen the Black Triangles. That was in Maine, correct?
That's right. It wasn't a black triangle. All she saw was a triangle formation of lights, and she said it was tiny and way up high.
Okay. And then you talked about a triangle vehicle in North Carolina. One of our listeners frequents between Maine and North Carolina, and she was curious where that was. Did you know the location of where that was? It's the one that had the beam of light that came out that you were describing.
Right. I can find that out really quickly. Actually, Lee Spiegel is the one who experienced that, and he's been actually texting me. So I will, when we take a break here, I'll text him and find out that location if she wants to hang in. She's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think of the exact location of where that happened. And that story goes on. There was a police officer that at another town over that was jumped out of his car, pulled his flashlight out of his trunk and flashed his light at it, and the thing flashed back at him, which is pretty bizarre. I wouldn't have ever been brave enough to do that.
Well, I had people that would do things like that when I was flying helicopters, and we would flash back as well, and people get pretty excited. In fact, I remember we had a piece of equipment on one of the early helicopters I flew that you could actually talk on CB radios. And I'll just take this quick aside. We were out in the West. It was in New Mexico, and we started talking. And those when CB was the height of its, it was at its zenith of its cultural implications.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy didn't believe. He says, if I'm talking to the big helicopter that's flying along I-10, fly over to the other side of the highway, swap sides of the highway. So we flew over to the other side of the highway. Well, that was it. Oh my God, everybody now wanted to talk to the big helicopter. And one poor truck that we got close to because of the kind of power that system had, I think it caught his CB radio on fire because it was smoking.
Oh.
I think it overpowered because of the amount of wattage because it was designed to work on the battlefield and when you went into those frequency ranges. So we stopped doing that after that. No more community engagement that way. That wasn't good cricket back in the day, but it was a lot of fun. I'll never forget the enthusiasm in their voice when they could not believe that we switched over to the other side. And I've had kids shoot bottle rockets at the helicopter, and I chased them around with the helicopter. Can only imagine the stories later on.
Wow. Well,
but I digress. Go ahead, sir.
Well, now the thing that's really dangerous is the laser pointers.
Yeah. I was zapped many an evening in Iraq with lasers. And, of course, the thing you're always wondering there is it actually connected to a weapon, or are they just trying to get you in the eyes? So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's scary. Along the same lines, I don't know, have you ever heard of the Father Gill case?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not recalling the exact figures.
Yeah, that was back in 1962, and it was, God, I can't remember exactly where it was. I wanted to say Zimbabwe, but it wasn't. It was, anyway. He was outside. They were outside, and they saw these, first I think they saw 4 craft. It looked like one was repairing another one, and they kept seeing this craft would show up, and one night they were outside, and there it was, and there was actually, looked like beings on top of the craft. And so they waved at him, and the beings, whatever they were, waved back. This is all according to Father Gill. And J. Allen Hynek from Project Blue Book looked into that case and thought there was really something there. It was, they also had a situation with the flashlight. One of them took a flashlight, they called it a torch, I guess, and moved it back and forth, and the craft moved back and forth, which was pretty bizarre and exciting. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a pretty interesting case.
So let me ask you a couple cases that I think always seem to make our turns. Give me your thoughts on the Rendlesham Woodbridge Air Base, England, that famous involvement there.
Well, I consider that my own personal in the top 5 of UFO encounters myself. I've talked to a number of people that were involved, that were there. Charles Halt, I talk to him now and then. I had him on my show a number of times. And I think it's a legit case. And if anyone's ever listened to the audio recording that he made, during the encounter, there's a long version of that. He didn't even know, I remember he told me he didn't even know how that actually got out online when it first did. But that whole case, I think, there's a lot of controversy. There's there's a little bit of, convoluted tales between the different people there. There was some friction. Larry Warren is kind of pushed out of the topic a little bit right now. Peter Robbins and Larry Warren did the book Left at Eastgate. I believe that's called that. And so there was some issues going on with that. But overall, that case is amazing. Happened in 1980 over a period of a few days. And, when I've sat and, just had a discussion with Charles Halt about, what he saw and the way the craft looked like an eyeball, sort of like dripping molten through the woods,
Mm-hmm.
kind of going zigzagging between the trees. And then it burst into 5 lights. I mean, I love those bizarre stories. And I've heard, I actually going to have someone on my show that I was in a hotel last week. I'll just say this briefly. And I was filling out paperwork and
You don't have to be brief. We got plenty of time.
I know, but I'm going to have her on my show, so I don't want to spoil it for my
Oh,
listeners
okay.
too much. But it's along this, she saw a very similar thing. I'm going to actually call her during my show and have her tell her story, because I love to hear stories of people that don't really have an interest in UFOs, but something happened. And, when I've talked to Charles Halt about that, he'll say, I wish it never happened. I wish it was not part of my life. It's caused me more grief than anything else. And I believe him. I think he really feels that way.
Very well. I will tell listeners that know my show to check out a couple of those pieces with Ross Sharp, who was an RAF officer and a aero engineer in the RAF, retired from the Royal Air Force. And he has a very interesting take on just the background behind the physical area of the Rendlesham Forest, that part of England, the bases, the underground facilities that are there, the extensive underground facilities that are there. Very interesting take from someone who's originally from England, now lives in the States. Very good friend of the show. So there's some interesting parts and pieces to that. I will also note that when Mr. Lear was on the show, that is the event that made him a believer, because he had a friend, that someone he knew, A-10 pilot, that was stationed in Bentwaters, which is the other connecting area, the other connecting base in that area, who relayed to Bill all the activity that was going on and the lockdown that they were in, and the night, the 3 or so nights that they were going through these different activity levels. And John just knew that this man was as straight as it came. There was just no reason for him to be interested. And when he brought these facts out and told him, he was intrigued, and that's what sent him on the path that he's on in UFO discovery and research on his part. Interesting case. I've had the Ramseys on a number of times. They're connected with the Aztec UFO. I think it's probably the best researched UFO event in the United States. I think their work is bar none the best that's out there. What's your take on their research and on that particular incident?
Actually, I'm kind of on the fence on that one, only because I've heard a number of people stating that they think that basically it's a hoax. So I don't know. I know that they have done a lot of in-depth research, but I just don't know how accurate it is, and I don't want to make enemies on this show or enemies of friends of your show. But I've heard some mixed, a lot of mixed stories on that particular case, and I don't really know what to believe. There are a few cases out there that I have felt that way about, and that one.
How about the our most famous of the UFO cases, Roswell?
That always seems to come up. I think that something happened there. I don't know exactly what happened. I know I've talked to Mac Maloney, and he says he doesn't think anything happened there other than, what the Air Force is saying. But, the Air Force did lie 5 times on what actually happened. It's possible. It is possible it could have been something like the mogul that they said it was. But I think there's just too much of smoke there to say that it was just, a military operation. Because, for one thing, a lot of people have made the argument that everything that they used in those mogul balloons was, unclassified and nothing unusual. Whether it's a string of balloons would make the total difference. I don't know. But I think something happened. And the question I always ask people that are totally skeptic of it is why on earth would the Air Force ever release for the newspapers that they found a disc in the first place? I mean, it's very simple. Like if they didn't find one or if it was something else, to say absolutely nothing. Why did they have the press release that they had found a disc there or a craft at all? Why would they do that? And what's your thoughts on that in particular?
I am a believer on the Aztec because of the level of research that has been done by the Ramseys and Dr. Thayer. I'm convinced of its legitimacy that the vehicle did crash there. There's too many parts and pieces that when you look at their extensive, I mean, they have laid out a case of legal type findings and fact, and they keep opinion out of it. The Roswell thing, I tend to follow into Mac's camp that there's a lot of stuff that's there, and I'm wondering if they had a set pat. The three balloons together I find interesting because of the possibility of it being a surveillance or a weapon system as the Cold War is just starting up. The Japanese sailed numbers of balloons out of Japan trying to start fires, and they were prepared to put biological agents into the mainland of the United States and Canada by balloon delivery. They were ready to do that. They had tried, and there's a couple small cases where there was, believe a school teacher was killed when students on a field trip in Oregon found one of the balloons that had crashed that had the incendiary devices to set the woods on fire. And I've seen that activity that's come up in other ways like it. So the part about the disc doesn't fit real well, but I have been in enough just kind of day-to-day operations where there has been a mishap, and the way that information gets transmitted and passed initially, things will get that screwed up. I mean, you'll have people that are reported as killed when they're not. You'll have just a grievous amount of damage when it's not that way, and vice versa, where you don't think anything bad has happened. So I can understand the confusion on that. I tend to have a more sinister or a sneaky suspicion that somebody pretty early on realized, because of everything that happened under the development of the atomic bomb, the fallout, no pun intended, it really wasn't an intended part of it, but from that program, the amount of secrecy, the amount of people that were involved, and all the other activities that were going on around at that same time in that area of Roswell, in that particular part of the region of the United States. So I think that there is good case for it to go through it. And I think it also was a very telling case that the government, the Air Force, learned very quickly that the press could be a very useful tool for disinformation. And I think it's a very good case of disinformation and how that went and how it went forward from there.
Well, I could see, I understand where you're going with that. One of the questions that came up that the Air Force lied about, and it was a very obvious lie, was that there were a number of people that say they witnessed bodies, small bodies.
Right.
And then the Air Force came out they thought it was that there were crash test dummies that were actually, parachuted. And that didn't hold water because they didn't start using them until 1952. So that was another lie. And it just the fact that there was lies from the Air Force about what was going on. I understand what you're saying. Maybe they cover it up that way, but still, when it comes to, people stating that they saw, figures in the desert, and there was, I think, some saying that one was alive, that type of thing. I don't know. The one thing I think about Roswell, I think is interesting about Roswell, is that it's becoming almost like a myth, and it has to do with, as time goes on, there's so much, there's the annual event, and there's, people really like dressing in costumes, and it's getting, out there with the tinfoil hats. And I think it's kind of all muddied up and eventually is going to just be something celebrated, and no one will even have any answers because all the people that were involved, all the witnesses now are either dead, or I think there's only a couple left that actually claim they saw something, which I know, Stan Friedman started, and then Don Schmidt and Carey were doing, interviews with people that claim they witnessed things. I think it's an interesting case. It's certainly, it's not resolved, and I sort of have mixed feelings about it, but I think something happened. And I'm not sure if what you're talking about is what the answer is or not. I really don't know.
Turning towards New England, the Hills, what do you think of their case?
I think it's very interesting. Before we go there, just quickly, for your listener that was in North Carolina, that Lee texted me, that location of that town was Lumberton, North Carolina. That's where they
been through there many times.
Oh, have you? Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah.
The Betty and Barney Hill case, I think, is pretty interesting. I know the niece, Kathy Martin, fairly well. We talk a bit, and very nice lady. I think that, and by the way, the last time I had her on my show, she actually broke down. She was upset that she broke down on camera, actually, out in Phoenix when I had her on the show, because of what Betty and Barney had gone through. It was very traumatic for them, and it was very sad, and they just didn't know where to turn once the story got out. They didn't leak the story got out, and right. They had to decide. She said she was right there when they made the decision to either run forward or face it, and they decided to face it, and that really was a very emotional time, and really upset Kathy to think about their situation at the time. They did go through a lot of grief. That case, I know there are a lot of people, or some people, think that it never happened, or that something happened and they saw the light up on the mountain instead. They saw the jack-o'-lantern at the jack-o'-lantern restaurant instead of a craft. There's a lot of people trying to put holes in it. I think something happened, along with some other cases that are really well known. They seem like they're out there. For instance, the Allagash case. I think something really happened there too. I don't know if you've looked into that yourself, but that is quite a case.
I agree with you on the Allagash case. There's enough there. You made the remark about the tinfoil hat, so a little bit tongue-in-cheek as I say this, but there's nothing wrong with putting tinfoil in your hat. And some of the best teachers I've had, some of the best sources of information, some of the most candid people I've been with have been the least formally educated folks that you can imagine. So I understand what the remark means, and I do laugh with it because it's part of our culture, and it's part of the phenomena that goes on with that. But it's sort of like that expression: just because you are paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. Okay, there is that part of it. Allagash, yeah, there's just too much that happens that I don't understand. I will not go into depth of folks that have presented stuff that they've talked about, and they have nothing to substantiate or way to back it up. I believe that they believe what they're saying. I believe that they've had some kind of an experience, and this is what they've connected it to. This is what they're saying it is. So on that same line, this is one I want to drive to. Mr. Lazar, what do you think of him and his claims from Area 51?
The best part of Bob Lazar is George Knapp. I know that sounds kind of funny, but I think the world of George Knapp. He's very good broadcaster, first of all, but also a very good journalist, and takes a lot of caution. That's the only type of validity that I could possibly see. Now, I know there are so many holes in how he got his education, and he probably did not go to MIT like he said, because, at a live interview, someone asked him, well, what's the monument outside of MIT? Or what's the square? And he couldn't answer that, and everybody that would ever go there would absolutely know that question. So whether he somehow got in to Area 51 without having the education, I don't know. I know Stan Friedman's looked into his childhood, schooling, and I will say this: there's absolutely no doubt about it that Bob Lazar is highly intelligent. But whether he actually, when his story falls apart, and he actually did not go to these schools that he says he went to, being a fine art and antique appraiser, we come across a lot of fakes. And
Sure.
Once we come across a fake in a house, for instance, if I'm doing an appraisal and I'm in a house and I see a fake painting, and right away I can tell it's a fake. Sometimes you have to do a lot of research before you can tell. But everything is suspect. And that's how I feel about the MJ-12 documents. That's how I feel about Bob Lazar. Like, once there are some untruths that are uncovered, how can you possibly believe the rest of it? That's kind of how I feel.
Do you think that we have extraterrestrial aliens living amongst us now?
In my gut feeling is I don't think so, but that's only an opinion. I think there's a lot of people that really do think that, but I don't. I'm not feeling it. I just think that it would be a little too obvious, but
Okay.
I'm not ruling it out totally. It's just that
Well,
I don't feel
no
it.
rational. I don't think anybody reasonable would rule any of it out. I mean, it's just fair to you state what you surmise based on what your experience has been. Okay, I'm getting the flash that we're coming up to the end of this block. Marc Dantonio is going to join us on the next part.
Wow.
That should be fun.
That will be.
Do you think this year, 18 going into 19, we're going to see the major breaker that's going to put the evidence on the world stage that we are not the only beings, that we have been we've had encounters, that this UFO, the extraterrestrial part of it, is true?
I think that we are. By the way, Lee Spiegel just texted me. He thinks that aliens are living among us. So he's listening to the show. Hey, I think that I think it's very possible, because I think, if nothing else, that New York Times article and Elizondo and to the people like To the Stars, there's a lot of there's kind of bashing about them out there. But I think that it's possible. I think they've opened up the door to at least a serious look. And I keep feeling like we're on the edge of discovering life out there somehow, somewhere. I feel like we're very close to that, and I hope I see that in my lifetime, but I don't know for sure.
You're listening to Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, kgrradio.com. My guest tonight, Mr. Martin Willis. Been an unbelievably fast 90 minutes here that we've gone by here.
That's right.
And we'll be returning for our last block. Marc Dantonio joining us. Task Force Griffin, KGR Radio, talking to the greatest audience on the planet. Please join us. 3 minutes.
Clear. All right, let's get Marc on. And speedy recovery. I hope that Lee Spiegel is doing better, because I know he was under the weather for a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's doing good.
Good.
Yep, he's doing good. Yep.
Get Marc.
I'll see if I can get Marc on video. I'll squeeze me over here. And let's see.
Let's see if Marc has his video up.
Howdy.
Marc, do you got video capability right now, so we can share it on Martin Willis's YouTube?
I wish I did.
Uh-oh.
I Hang on. Let me see if I can get this camera in.
And Mark, be ready. We're hot. The YouTube channel is active.
Yeah, we're actually going over YouTube. How you doing, Mark?
Good. How you doing, Martin?
Good. I know we've been texting back and forth, but haven't talked in a while.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't text me. Thanks. I need to see where I stand.
He doesn't have your number.
That's exactly right. No, no. Martin and I were talking because there was a possible show that I was supposed to be or asked to be part of, but they didn't pursue it. You know, they wanted to. Yeah, they wanted to, but it didn't matter. You know, it's like I got so many things going on. It's okay. Let me see here. How do I get this?
I'm all duded up for you, by the way.
Oh, well, look at you. That's That's usually the photograph I see. That's a moving picture. That's you.
There you go.
That is so cool. Look at you. Wow.
I'm going to look while you're doing that. I'm going to look in the chat room to see if we have any questions in there. But continue on, you two, if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
We don't need much of an invitation to get into our furball. That's. How you been feeling there, old man?
You talking to Bill?
Oh God.
I'm fine.
Good.
I'm doing all right. So, Bill, how can I get my video on this camera to work? Do I have to start this all over here with Skype or what?
Well, you may have to go to Tools, Options, Video Settings, or you just simply take the line out of the camera, the video.
It's a USB.
Yeah, you should be able.
Let me see.
Just make
Tools,
sure.
there's video settings. Okay. Oh, look, it's gonna work. Okay, so now I'll just say, at least, am I in? Is it working now?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, you don't see it. Okay, hold on.
You should take the little line out of the video part on the call.
Yeah.
Turn your camera on.
Yep, you're right. I can see it now. I got to turn it on. Okay, so it was there. I just had to do this.
Yeah,
there
we
it goes.
go.
All right. All right, hang on. I got to do some adjustments here.
Yes, I'm a little
tiny.
I'm a little tiny picture. I'm using a document reading webcam that I actually use in the observatory for just like a little insect camera about that size, actually, on the screen.
Gentlemen, we're coming back in about 10 seconds.
I might have to switch back and forth between you two.
Very nice.
I can't seem to get both of you on.
Okay.
Okay.
In 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome back to Task Force Griffin on KGR Radio, kgradio.com. My guest tonight, Marc Willis, just been joined by my next guest, Marc Dantonio, who we all know follows this show in a few minutes with his outstanding efforts. You folks that are on YouTube have been hearing the getting us set up in the background, so a lot of the mystery, a lot of the intrigue has been left on the floor. If you hear I was trying to get everybody's stuff on, and insect cameras and aces of spades being thrown around and things like that. Good evening to both you gentlemen. Thank you for joining us and talking to the greatest audience on the planet. Marc, you know Martin already, correct?
I do. Martin's a good friend. Yeah.
Yes.
And thank you for allowing me to basically cut in on his time here tonight.
Well, it's up to Martin. He was very excited that knowing that you wanted to jump on, and we love your show. And
I love your show.
It's always fun. Well, thank you.
It's
always fun
fest.
when we get together. Yeah, it's a love fest. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So let me ask you both a quick couple of questions. Where you think things are at. I'm torn between two parts. Some of the guests that I've had on, I'm convinced that in this year of 18 going into 19, we're going to have a major breakthrough in truth or information. And it's going to be around our UFO, extraterrestrial, and other activities. It could be something just in the area of technology. When we left the last section, Martin, you kind of thought that possibility is there. I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you both think about that? Do you think that we're at this point that the pressure is building to the point now that I think the reason that we are in the difficulty we're in is we got so used to lying and got used to lying in the name of national security. And that's an easy label to throw on. I mean, the times that we've been living through probably for the last 10, 15 years, a lot of bad things have happened, and they put the stamp on it, national security, and that's the reason why you try to bury it.
I'll let you go,
I think
Mark.
that makes it. I think it makes the truth coming out very difficult, because we now live in an age that you can go back and find out, well, we knew this for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years.
Actually, I do have something I can say about that, Commander. I really love your helmet, man. That's great. It's just great. Anyway, yeah.
If you're a very good boy, you might get one.
Oh, you kidding me? I'd love to just try one on. Yeah. Now, to answer your question, I know for a fact, and this was just from my experience, that there were some really weird things that I have witnessed, in my life. I'm a science guy, so again, I've said this often enough that people will say, yeah, he's saying this again. But these things don't happen to me until they do. And then what do you do with it? You've got to do something with what you experience. So, in my case, I had that experience when I was on board that submarine, right. And I can't shake that. And that was something that was secretive back then, program that was continuing from years past, and it continued to be in force for many years after that, I think. Because it was many years after that when I actually talked to the folks in the higher ups in the Navy who basically worked directly for the president. And I asked them, I asked one particular guy, what can you tell me about that? And he basically said he can't talk about that program. Now, he could have said, what program? I don't know what you're talking about. But he didn't. He said, I can't talk about that particular program. I thought that was an interesting response, because that was him saying, I'm not going to tell you anything, but by not saying anything, I'll say it in a way that will make you understand it's still going on. I'd love to tell you, but I can't, kind of a thing, There's
something there.
There is. And that was something that I kind of always knew in my head. The Russians came out and said that there were these unknown submerged objects moving at high speed underwater. Other navies have said that these things have been out there. I make no bones about the fact that I have no idea what they really are. Are they extraterrestrial? Well, we tend to leap toward that, don't we? We cross that wide gulf, going by all the other potential possibilities and leap into aliens all the time. We see the Giorgio memes, that says it's aliens, but the fact is we don't know what it is. And the fact that we don't know what it is leads us down the path that might take us to that position, because we don't know of anything on the planet that can do what we see. So that's where I leave it. I say, I don't know what it is, but it's something that we don't understand.
Commander, do you mind if I ask Mark a question?
Of course not.
So Mark, being an astronomer, the question I have for you is, if there is in fact possibly billions of planets out there, possibly even in our solar system that may be harboring intelligent life, just say if there is, why on earth would we be so special that they would be here visiting us? Why would you think that would happen?
Well, if you go back to Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, and you consider the cuneiform language, which was pretty much the first written history that Homo sapiens started to keep track of, you find that we've been around in that case, historically keeping records for about 5,000 years. We don't count the cave pictographs and the petroglyphs pecked into cliffs and stuff like that. I mean, I do, but I mean, in this particular case, let's just, for the record, just state that I'm going to take it from, say, cuneiform forward. So from that point of view, if you look at what happened, in that 5,000 years, we were bred to be a very curious species. We evolved to be very curious. We wanted answers. Why? Why does a species evolve and need to look for answers? Why does a species care where they come from? Okay, this is something that I don't have an answer for. But the one thing I can say is this might be a template that the universe provides for, based on how we were built from these amino acids, these particular chemistry that came together, the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid that we're all made of. Maybe this is something that has within it a template of sorts. Okay, as an example, all higher life forms on this planet have bilateral symmetry in the way that they interact with their world. Their internal organs are arranged all differently, but they have symmetry on the outside. They interact with their world. Well, that's a template. See, that's what I'm getting at. That's a template provided by the universe and the way that life formed on this planet, that all these higher life forms will have that type of symmetry. We didn't have to have symmetry. I mean, why don't we have pogo stick cows, boing, 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 hopping around pastures? We don't, because the symmetry is required. It's somehow required for life. So that's what I mean by template. So if there's a template for the way life develops, then maybe there's a template for the way the beings think. So if we're going to go and look for life elsewhere because we're curious, then I suspect that there's other beings out there that are just as curious and are doing the same thing. Now, what would they look for? We know food.
Yeah, something to eat.
Well, if they can cross if they can cross the gulf between the stars, then eating is not one of their big problems, okay? Because they can.
So using your example, people that take Lear jets to fly a specific kind of tuna or beef from one part of the globe to the other, when they could get something locally grown, you don't see that on an extraterrestrial scale.
I think that we have to talk about scale, actually. We need to talk about the scale of these events. If an extraterrestrial species is coming from, say, the nearest star, 4.3 light years away, the energy requirement to get here from there, even with what we see now in our limited existence, only 5,000 years of cuneiform forward, okay, written history, okay, in that time frame, we see ways to defeat the speed of light as a speed limit, right? So another race would also, but we see that there are stupendous amounts of energy that we'd require to do that, to actually beat that limit. So another race would also have that. And that technology would be very expensive because the energy would be a commodity in any civilization where this becomes a thing. So you do have on this planet the ultra wealthy who might fly to Paris to have a steak and French wine and then fly back to New York, okay, in their private jet. But the scale of that travel, the cost of that travel is something that's absorbed within that person's wealth packet, okay, the ball of wealth that one person, that one family has per se, okay. Now, an extraterrestrial species probably has to have gone planet-wide and have this consensus among everyone on the planet, every being that's intelligent, that they're going to travel to another star. And to do that is going to require stupendous amounts of energy, even if you're an advanced species. And you're going to have to use some of that energy in order to do it. I don't think they're going to travel here to take Commander Cobra and make him lunch. All right.
I mean, I am an acquired taste, but that doesn't need to really be said here at this point.
I'm not going to. I will not go there. You got a cool helmet on, and you might not let me try it on if I don't, agree with you. But I just think that we have a lot. There's a lot of considerations, and an alien species, if they're curious, if curiosity is also a template to life in the universe, then I think an alien species is probably going to look for beings like themselves. All right. And the reason they would look for beings like themselves is because of the fact that that's what we do. And why should they be any different? They may not have the same morality as us, for instance, and that could be possible. They might not have the same philosophies, of course, or the same cultural beliefs naturally, but they'll be different. In the same way that the Rapa Nui on Easter Island were different to the Polynesian Islanders the first time they found them. That was a very different meeting for sure. So, and I think that the science is what stands between us, our science level, and their science level is what stands between us right now. That separates us. If we have an acquired science that we get that's going to take us to the stars, then we're going to be more on uneven footing with them, and that maybe that's a concern. I might be concerned that these crazy beings are going to come to my planet or come to my star system, but if they're going to search for life elsewhere, I think that they're going to look for the chemicals in the atmosphere that they need to live, and see if it's in our atmosphere. Now, we evolved carbon-based, and we evolved to breathe oxygen. So they're going to look for planets that perhaps have oxygen if they have the same development.
Sure.
So we would stand out quite easily, actually, as a planet surrounding a relatively normal star that has an oxygenated atmosphere. Because anytime you have oxygen in an atmosphere, it's really not supposed to be there. Our planet has not been in equilibrium since life began on this planet. It's actually in what's called disequilibrium. We don't have an equilibrium setting on our planet that's been met. Okay, only way back in the beginning when the Earth was first formed. But after the atmosphere came along, and most importantly, life. These 3.8 billion years ago, these cyanobacteria that started pumping oxygen into the atmosphere. Right. The oceans, which started sucking up carbon dioxide, thus making the atmosphere thinner and more palatable for more life forms still. And then in those oceans that formed the plankton, the phytoplankton that began in there. Those are the, along with plants, are the main oxygen producers on the planet. So they keep that level of oxygen falsely and artificially elevated way higher. And if they didn't do that, then this planet that oxygen would, of course, leach back out into the soils. It would, oxidize many things and go into the water and oxidize, elements in the water and form all this other chemistry. And so the oxygen would eventually be depleted. So
right. I got to throw a lasso on you because rodeo is my favorite sport.
I know. Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Bull riding. I mean, if you want to talk a sport, that's a sport, bull riding. The rest of that stuff is a waste of time. Now, with that said, now that another facet of the jewel of Commander Cobra has been revealed to the audience.
That's a heck of a gem, let me tell you.
I'm gonna take it around the wheelhouse.
All right.
Do you believe in extraterrestrial life? Yes. No.
Yes.
Yes. Martin.
That's a 10-4.
Yes. Okay.
CB talk.
That means yes, Commander. Yeah. I don't know if you know that
yeah,
military type stuff.
If you were listening to the show, you would have known we had our little CB interlude when I was part of an Air Force program, inadvertently frying CB radios on I-10. Different story for a different time. Kind of hush hush. We don't want to talk about it. Classification.
Breaker 19. Breaker 19.
With that said,
yep.
Back to you, sir. Do you believe we have been visited?
Am I the sir?
Yes.
I think so. Yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. My feeling is that I think that it's very possible.
Okay. Hold on.
I'm not going to say anything. I'm done. I'm not going to say a word.
What do you think?
I think it's highly likely. I can't say for certain, but I think it's highly likely. It makes more sense than a lot of other ideas, hypotheses of what's going on.
Okay, agreed. I'm definitely much more in the affirmative than the two of you. There's no doubt in my mind about it, but I have nothing that I can point to as a definitive fact on that.
Well, that's how I feel too, actually. I mean,
all right. Do you
nothing definitive?
Back to my earlier part of this question that kind of led this up. Do you think this is the time period that we are going to, in our lifetimes, the remaining of our lifetimes, if we have null projections, all those happy things, because I expect my two guests are going to have many, many more trips or complete trips around the sun. That's what I hope for. Do you think it's going to happen that we're going to get the word, that we're going to get the evidence? Everything from the day that the Earth stood still kind of moment to finally the books will crack open and the files, and yep, we did have the meeting. Eisenhower did sit down with the aliens. That did occur. Irrefutable written video proof. Do you think it's going to happen?
You want my answer?
You're the
yes,
sir.
Mark,
Yeah,
go first.
sir. Yeah.
Because I'm happy to defer if you want to go first.
No, I want you to go first, Mark.
Okay. I think that it will not happen. And you need an explanation? Because I'd be happy to tell you why.
We'll circle back. Martin, what do you think?
You're basically asking the question: are we going to have disclosure? Is that?
We're going to finally have the refute it. It's just going to be the evidence in any of those formats that I put out. The vehicle finally unmasks and it lands, and it's the day the Earth stood still type scenario, or the records that have been kept, the programs that have gone on, the X-Files kind of thing that's gone on occurs.
I don't think that it's going to have anything to do with our government, like a lot of people have bought into, and are working hard, like Steve Bassett's job. I brought him up a few times. I don't think that we're going to have government disclosure that we have aliens visiting or have visited, but I think that it may reveal itself sooner or later. I don't know if it's going to be in my lifetime or not. So I think that eventually that will happen. It will reveal itself that they are here.
All right. I got a question from the chat room, and I'm going to add a little bit to it. Do both of you think that human beings are from Earth, that they evolved from the Earth, is the way I'll put it, or do you believe that we were planted here, seeded, or a combination where there's been some kind of alteration?
I'll take this one.
Oh, well.
Okay.
Because
that's right.
I've been communicating with Lee Spiegel and on this, and I wanted to bring this up. When I was in high school, I wrote an essay in English, and I actually got an A on it, which was a rare occasion.
Did you write it in the language English, or was it in English class? Which way are you going there?
English both. It was
English
class.
Both, okay.
Yeah.
Because Marc was going to ask. I could see him he was getting ready to come right through the screen.
Yeah.
And now he's going to put, oh, no, not me. No.
So I basically said the reason that there are so many different races and they're so different around the world is because we were seeded by extraterrestrial. I actually wrote that in high school. I forgot all about it until I met someone an insurance agent of mine, a broker, who said that when he was in Vietnam, he actually worked in a special part of the Air Force that studied UFOs. And I remembered it then because I said to him, why are they here? And I said, when I was in high school, I wrote this essay. And I told him that, we were possibly seeded different races to see how we'd get along. And he said, that's kind of this is what he said, okay? Now, I don't know, I could never find him again. But he said, that's kind of what the government thinks that we're more like a petri dish. And I think it was fascinating. Whether it's true or not, I think it is a possibility, definitely, that we are an experiment. And that's what Lee Spiegel just texted me, more or less, that we're being watched to see how their experiment goes. I don't know. It's possible.
I sure hope we're not disappointing them. I know I'm pretty disappointed when I see it. Marc, the question to you, your answer, sir?
Well, my answer is kind of diametrically opposed. I don't believe we were seeded, actually. I think that we are. I think that you don't have to jump to aliens to see what we have here as a normal outcome for the different environments, the different continental arrangements, the different materials and so forth, different amounts of sunlight. I think that the thing that's most important here is that all you have to do is, lick your forearm. Okay?
Oh, do we have to do this on camera? Okay, here we go.
Hey, you lick your forearm, okay?
Yeah.
What do you taste? Don't be funny now. Okay. What's the thing about your body? Okay. Your body is salty.
Right.
Right? You have a salinity in your body. Do you know where that comes from?
The ocean.
That salinity, yes, it's a vestigial ocean that we carry around in this organ we call the skin, because we were once in the ocean. When we evolved out of the ocean, we, like turtles, carried the water on our back effectively, except we called it, skin. And we carry that vestigial ocean around with us every day. And we have since we've evolved out of the ocean. That's why we have that salinity in our skin. All right. Now, this is something that tells me that we evolved here, and I don't see any reason to suggest aliens had some kind of hand in it. I think that the planet and the life forms here are more than capable of evolving themselves. Look at some of the other life forms that have evolved on this planet that aren't human, but are animal. Some of these life forms have such an incredible evolutionary tree. Well, did nobody help them? Yet they went through this unbelievable turn of events throughout their evolution and became what they are. All right, and nothing helped them along the way. And then you'd have to literally jump to say every bit of the life forms, every life form, no matter what it is on this planet, was seeded. And you'd have to say that it was all of them or none of them. You can't just say it was humans, because that falls down on the fact that we have this ocean within us that we carry. So you would have to have seeded life on this planet when there was just oceans on the planet. And I can't answer whether that happened or not. But I just know that evolution has its own course that it follows. Not every destination in evolution is intelligence, as we obviously know.
Well, if you've driven on any major road as of late or been on public transportation, proof in that statement there, Doctor.
There's that. But that's my point, okay, that, we don't need to leap to aliens. And I believe that aliens exist. I believe that there's alien life. And in fact, I believe they might even be here. Like I said, we're only 5,000 years into our written history or so. And, again, not counting pictographs and petroglyphs. And from that position, we can already see that we can defeat that light speed barrier, with some technology that's a little bit over our horizon right now. But because it's so favorable now, because it's come such a long way, there's, Sonny White at NASA is investigating this Froning Alcubierre drive, which is the warp drive.
Right.
And they've got a funded lab to study this. There's a reason for that. It's not because they just want to play around with this cool little thing that could never happen. They're playing around with this because they think it's actually the way to the stars. And that's it with a civilization that's basically 5,000 years old in its written history. Okay, so we've got we make some really good leaps, and then we sometimes will stagnate for a while, then we make some more leaps, and the whole question of reaching a certain point where it's a singularity, where we can't depend on humans anymore, we have to go to machines to do something for us, to take us that next step. That's certainly on its way, and we've also faced that already a few times. So we're already facing down these problems that some advanced species have, and we're doing this on our terms, and we're actually able to do it, so far. So I'm convinced that we weren't seeded. I'm convinced that we're going to find the technology to go to the stars, just as another race probably did, because we came along 4.6 billion years ago. Well, the galaxy was here, the universe rather was here over 9 billion years before that. So we know that there are planets out there that are literally over 12 billion years old. Planets. All right, we found them. Yeah. So that tells me that life existed from early in the universe, or life could have existed from early on in the universe. And who knows how far they developed. See?
Well, Mark, you really know how to burst a bubble, don't you?
I'm not trying to burst a bubble.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Well, you know what? I told Commander to lick his forearm. If you want, you can lick your armpit.
He can't with that helmet on, though. He's
yeah.
No, he was directing that to you, Mark. No, I stop at the forearm.
I know.
There's no reason to prove how flexible I am. But I could get my head and the helmet to my armpit if I had to. It's just, that's just not going to happen tonight.
Too much information here. I don't need that.
Well, you're the one that started it.
I did. I'm okay. I'm fine.
Any guess that he's talking to us from Connecticut with this attitude?
Yeah,
this is exactly
of course.
what we look forward to.
They always do that to us Mainers.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I used to go to Port Clyde, Maine every summer for the summer, because that's where my family was. The entire town of Port Clyde was a relative.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember you telling me that. Right.
And now they're taken over by LL Bean. My cousin's general store was bought by Bean's something or other, some woman there. I forget her first name.
And we're not going to discuss Bean, because they're not contributing to the capitalistic side of this enterprise anymore. So that's it. All right, gentlemen, we're down to our last 2 minutes. Mark's going to be rolling and getting ready for his show. So let's round the wheel here. Martin, obviously I'm going to have to get you on again. This was way too fast. This was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed your Martin flipped the tables on me. Unlike you, Mark, put questions to me and had me answer stuff. So
Old habits die hard.
Yeah.
He's a hell of an interviewer, you know that.
Yeah, he reminds me of those guys, the Stasi, when East Germany was East Germany, you know.
Well, you know, he's got a great interview style, though, nonetheless. Okay, he's not quite as bad, okay, as them for sure. Okay, he's actually quite good.
No, he smiles a lot like the Stasi guys at the gates when he used to cross in there.
Well,
You have cigarettes? Yes, I have cigarettes. You may go then. You got papers? They're not in order. Speaking of papers being in order, we were joined by Marc Dantonio, who's going to have his show coming up. Sky Tour will be on right after this. Show's going fantastic. You both have great shows. I hope folks that, when they're not here at Task Force Griffin, are taking advantage of the podcast and doing some live with you both. I thank you both for being guests tonight.
thank you, Commander. It was
Thanks.
a pleasure.
It's
was
been
great
a
to see
real
you again,
We'll have to
Martin.
do this again.
good to see
Maybe
you.
we can, as X-Lady likes to put it, another three-way. I'm not sure what she's talking about, but she seemed to be pretty happy with it. And I think the facial expressions just said
Too much
it all right
information
there.
once again.
Gentlemen,
That's great.
I salute. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful show with both of you. And to the greatest audience on the planet, talk to you again soon, hopefully next week. Hang tight.